It was past midnight when I found out. I was sitting on the edge of our bed, unable to sleep, my thoughts drifting aimlessly. Ours was a quiet suburban home, the kind of place where everything looked perfectly normal from the outside. But that night, I sensed something was off. I reached for Olivia's phone, which lay on the nightstand. I wasn't snooping, or at least I didn't think I was. I was just curious. I'd never gone through her messages before, and I wasn't sure what I was looking for. The screen lit up in the dark, casting a soft glow on Olivia's peaceful face as she slept beside me. My fingers scrolled without direction, until they stopped. There it was, the name I never expected to see. Nate. He wasn't just some guy. He was a friend, our friend. We'd shared dinners, laughed over drinks, and talked about life. I opened the message thread, my heart pounding louder with each swipe. The words blurred for a moment as I blinked, trying to focus through the rising wave of disbelief. I can't stop thinking about last night. You make me feel alive, oh, alive. My pulse quickened. The rest of the messages were worse. Far worse. Graphic details of moments that were supposed to be mine, my wife, my Olivia, with him. I sat there, frozen, staring at the screen. My body went numb, but my mind raced. How long had this been going on? What had I missed? How many smiles had I misinterpreted? How many laughs at the dinner table were hiding something I couldn't see? I wanted to scream, to wake her up and demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I closed the phone quietly, set it back down, and stared at the ceiling. My chest tightened with the weight of betrayal. I knew in that instant that our marriage was over, even if she didn't know it yet. But this wasn't going to end with her just leaving me for Nate. No, I wouldn't make it that easy for them. If she was willing to destroy our life for him, then I would destroy theirs. The thought was sharp, cold, and calculated. But it felt right. Nate had taken something from me, something he had no right to touch, and he needed to pay for that. They both did. I lay there in the darkness, no longer feeling love for the woman beside me. All I felt was a deep, smoldering rage, and the seed of a plan began to take root in my mind. They would regret this. The next morning, the house was filled with the smell of coffee and the sound of Olivia humming softly in the kitchen. It was all so normal, so sickeningly routine. But to me, nothing was the same. I watched her move, pretending everything was fine. How easy it was for her to slip back into the role of the loving wife after a night of betrayal. The anger I'd kept bottled up from the night before began to rise again, but I forced it down. I needed to be patient. I needed control. I took a seat at the kitchen table, staring at the mug of coffee she'd set in front of me. "You have plans for today?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She glanced up, her smile as bright as ever. "Nothing special. Might go for a run later, and I thought we could have dinner with Nate and Megan this weekend." It's been a while. Her casual mention of his name hit me like a punch to the gut. Nate and Megan, his fiancée, the woman he was stringing along while screwing my wife behind her back. I could feel my grip tightening around the coffee cup. "Actually," I said, voice tight, "I need to talk to you about something." Olivia paused, sensing the change in my tone. She looked at me with furrowed brows, a faint hint of concern crossing her face. "What is it?" I set the cup down and leaned forward, my eyes locking onto hers. "I know about you and Nate." For a moment, her expression remained blank, like she didn't understand what I was saying. But then her eyes widened, and the color drained from her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She stammered, trying to find some kind of excuse, but it was too late. I could see the truth in her eyes. The guilt and the shame she was trying to hide. "I saw the messages, Olivia," I said, my voice low and cold. "All of them. You're not going to talk your way out of this." Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes welling up with tears. "Ben, it's not what you think. I never wanted to hurt you." I laughed bitterly. "Not what I think? You've been screwing one of my closest friends behind my back, and now you're going to tell me it's not what I think?" She started to cry, real tears this time. But I felt nothing, no sympathy, no desire to comfort her. I stood up, pushing the chair back hard enough that it scraped against the tile. I couldn't look at her anymore, not like this, not when I knew everything. "Why?" I asked, my voice a little louder now, more forceful. "Why him, Olivia? Was our life not enough for you?" Her sobs grew louder as she shook her head. "It wasn't like that. It just happened. I didn't plan it, Ben, I swear. I was confused, I didn't know." "Save it," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "I don't care. You made your choice." She looked desperate now, reaching out toward me like she could somehow fix what she had broken. Please, Ben, I'm sorry. It's over. It's done. I'll end it with him, I swear. But her words fell on deaf ears. I wasn't interested in her apologies or promises. I wasn't interested in her anymore. I knew what I had to do. I walked out of the kitchen without another word, leaving her to her tears. She didn't know it yet, but the damage was already done. This wasn't just about her betrayal. It was about payback. I wasn't going to let her and Nate walk away from this without consequences. As I sat down in my car, gripping the steering wheel, my mind was already racing. Nate thought he could take what was mine, that he could wreck my marriage and still live his life as if nothing had happened. But he was wrong. I was going to make sure of that. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through contacts, my pulse quickening. I knew exactly where to start. Nate had secrets, everyone does. It was only a matter of time before I found them and used them to burn his life to the ground. Olivia thought this was over, but it was just getting started. A week passed after the confrontation. Olivia walked on eggshells around me, trying to pretend like she was fixing things, like she could somehow erase what had happened. She'd stopped seeing Nate, at least that's what she said, but I knew better. This wasn't about her anymore. She was already collateral damage in my mind. My real target was Nate, and it was time to begin. I spent those days in silence planning. Nate thought he was untouchable, that his life, his friends, and his job were safe from consequences. But I knew things about him that most people didn't. We'd known each other for years, long enough to hear about each other's mistakes, long enough for me to collect little pieces of information, things I could twist, manipulate, and spread. I just needed the right moment. That moment came on Friday. Nate and I had mutual friends in the company he worked for, an insurance firm downtown. I heard through one of them, an old college buddy, that Nate had been up for a big promotion. The timing couldn't have been better. I met with Greg, one of his colleagues, for drinks after work, playing the part of the concerned friend. We sat at the bar, the noise of clinking glasses and casual chatter filling the space as I leaned in, faking worry. "You've heard about Nate, right?" I asked, dropping his name casually. Greg raised an eyebrow, curious but unaware. "No, what's up?" I took a deep breath, pretending to hesitate. "Look, man, I don't want to spread anything that's not true, but, well, it's been going around that he's seeing someone on the side. Not exactly great for a guy in his position, especially with Megan about to marry him." Greg's eyes widened, and I could see the gears turning. Office gossip spread faster than wildfire, and I knew he wouldn't be able to resist. I added just enough detail to make it believable without giving away too much. "Really? That doesn't sound like Nate. Are you sure?" Greg asked, though I could tell he was already buying it. "Yeah, I didn't want to believe it either, but you know how it is. People talk. I just hope it doesn't get to the wrong ears, especially not in his office. You know how uptight they are about that kind of stuff." Greg nodded, clearly already thinking about who he'd tell next. "Yeah, that could mess things up for him. I'll keep it quiet." But I knew better. By the time the weekend was over, that rumor would be halfway around the company, and by Monday, Nate would be in damage control mode. The beauty of it was, it didn't even matter if people believed it entirely, just planting the seed was enough. His reputation would start to crumble under the weight of doubt and suspicion. By the end of the night, I knew the rumor had already started its journey. Greg left the bar, probably calling someone on his way home. And I just smiled to myself. That was the first move. But I wasn't done yet. The next day, I started working on Nate's social circle. I knew he had a tight-knit group of friends from his college days, and they were all still close. I reached out to one of them, Mark, pretending to check in, just another concerned friend. "Hey, Mark, have you heard from Nate recently? He's been acting kind of strange." Mark was confused, but he bit. "No, not really. What's going on?" Well, I paused for effect, letting the tension build. I didn't want to say anything, but it seems like he's been messing around with someone behind Megan's back. I'm not the only one who's noticed. I mean, I don't want to get involved, but it just feels wrong not to say something. Especially since Megan's such a great girl. Mark was shocked. "No way. That doesn't sound like Nate at all." "You sure?" "I wish I wasn't, man. But you know how it goes. People can surprise you." Mark promised to keep it between us, but I knew better. The truth was, I didn't care if Nate denied everything. The people around him would start questioning him, second-guessing his loyalty and his integrity. Even if they didn't fully believe it, the doubt alone would be enough to start tearing his relationships apart, piece by piece. By Monday morning, the rumors had started to take root. Nate's office was buzzing with whispers. His friends were asking him questions he wasn't prepared to answer, and Megan, well, she hadn't heard anything yet. That was coming. I wasn't even done, but I could already see the cracks forming. It was like watching a structure slowly collapse after you've removed a few key supports. Nate's life, his carefully constructed world, was beginning to fall apart, and he had no idea it was me pulling the strings. By the time I got to work, I heard through the grapevine that Nate had been pulled into a meeting with our. Apparently, someone had reported concerns about his behavior outside the office. And now his promotion was on hold. His boss wasn't taking any chances, not with rumors of infidelity circling. I leaned back in my chair, satisfied. This was only the beginning. There was more damage to be done, and I wasn't going to stop until Nate had lost everything. Olivia might have thought this was over. But as far as I was concerned, it was just getting started. By the middle of the week, the cracks in Nate's life were becoming full-blown fissures. I could see it in the way he carried himself. The tension in his shoulders, the frantic look in his eyes. At work, the promotion he had been gunning for had all but slipped through his fingers. People were whispering behind his back, and he knew it. Every time we saw each other, Nate's friendly demeanor seemed more forced. I made sure to play the role of the concerned friend, giving him pats on the back and asking him if everything was okay, but I could see through his smile. The rumors had done their job. He was drowning, and it was only a matter of time before he went under. The final nail in the coffin came that Friday night. Nate had been invited to a company event, one of those stuffy cocktail parties where everyone schmoozes and pretends to care about each other's lives. I knew he had to attend, especially with his promotion on the line, but I also knew how precarious his situation was. That evening, I reached out to Megan. I had gotten her number a few years ago, back when we were all still close. I knew the risk, but the payoff was worth it. I sent a simple text. Hey Megan, it's Ben. I'm really sorry to bring this up, but I think you deserve to know. You should ask Nate about his late nights with Olivia. I hope it's not true, but I didn't want to keep it from you. You deserve better. I knew Megan wouldn't respond right away. She'd be at the party with Nate, and that message would hit her phone when she least expected it, in a room full of his colleagues, with no escape. I didn't have to wait long for the chaos to unfold. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a text from a mutual friend who'd been at the party. Dude, you won't believe this. Megan just stormed out of the company event. Nate followed her, and they were arguing in the parking lot. Everyone saw. I smiled at the message, imagining the scene. Nate, in his sharp suit, ran after Megan as she hurled accusations at him, while his coworkers stood by, watching it all fall apart. He had been caught off guard, blindsided by something he never saw coming. By the next morning, the fallout was clear. Megan had packed her bags and left their apartment. She had called off the engagement. Nate's reputation, both at work and among his friends, was in tatters. Even the people who hadn't believed the rumors couldn't ignore what had happened at the party. Word spread quickly. Nate was now the guy who'd been cheating on his fiancée, the one who had fooled everyone. His colleagues distanced themselves, and his boss, who had been considering giving him that big promotion, quietly rescinded the offer. HR had already started looking into other issues, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they found a reason to push him out entirely. Nate was finished, and he had no idea I was the one pulling the strings. While Nate's world was collapsing, Olivia was starting to feel the pressure too. She had been quiet at home, walking on eggshells since our confrontation. I could tell she was still trying to figure out what my next move was. Part of her believed she could salvage our marriage, even though I had made it clear that there was no going back. But I wasn't going to leave her untouched by the consequences of her actions. It didn't take long for word of Nate's downfall to reach her. One night, as we sat in our living room in near silence, she finally spoke. Have you heard about Nate and Megan? She asked, her voice shaky. I nodded, keeping my face neutral. Yeah, sounds like Megan found out about his extracurricular activities. Olivia's face went pale, and I could see the fear in her eyes. She didn't ask how Megan had found out. Deep down, I think she knew. I never wanted any of this to happen, she stammered. I didn't mean for things to get this bad. I turned to her, my gaze hard. You didn't mean for things to get this bad? What exactly did you think was going to happen, Olivia? You thought you could cheat on me with our friend and walk away with everything intact? She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, I almost felt something resembling pity. But it disappeared just as quickly as it came. Everyone knows now, I continued. Nate's lost his job, Megan's gone, and you've ruined everything. I didn't want to lose you, she whispered, tears now streaming down her face. I shook my head. It's too late for that. Over the next few weeks, Olivia began to realize just how isolated she had become. Our friends, the ones we had shared holidays and weekends with, started to pull away. Some knew about her affair with Nate, while others had heard enough rumors to make their own conclusions. Invitations to gatherings dried up, and even the few friends who tried to stay neutral couldn't ignore the whispers that surrounded her. She tried to reach out to them, but the damage had been done. People didn't want to be involved, didn't want to be associated with her. After all, in their eyes, she had not only betrayed me, but she had also played a part in Nate's downfall. Her name became tainted, and soon, it was just the two of us in a house that felt more like a prison. I watched her every day, the regret and guilt eating away at her. She tried to make amends, cooking dinners and offering apologies, but I never accepted them. It wasn't enough. Nothing would ever be enough to fix what she had broken. She had made her bed, and now she was lying in it, alone. For a brief moment, I considered letting her go, filing for divorce, and walking away. But that felt too easy. I wasn't finished yet. Watching her suffer, watching her world shrink until it was just me and the cold silence between us, was a slow, satisfying punishment. She had betrayed me, and I was going to make sure she never forgot the price of that betrayal. Nate was already destroyed, and Olivia was next. I didn't need to lift a finger anymore. She was unraveling all on her own. All I had to do was sit back and watch. And so I did. As the weeks turned into months, the house grew colder. Olivia and I barely spoke. And when we did, it was tense and forced. She looked worn down as if the weight of her guilt was too much to carry. The once vibrant, confident woman I had married was now a shadow of herself, and I reveled in it. Every day she woke up, hoping for a sign that things might get better between us, but I made sure to extinguish that hope. One evening, I came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a photo of us from happier times. Her eyes were red and puffy, and I could tell she had been crying for hours. "I can't do this anymore, Ben," she whispered, her voice broken. I didn't respond at first. I just stood there, watching her unravel, my heart a cold, empty space where love used to be. It should have been satisfying. I had wanted this, to watch her pay, to see her fall apart the way I had. But something was shifting, something I couldn't quite place. "Do what?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. "This," she said, gesturing around the empty kitchen. "Living like this. It's killing me. I know I deserve it. I know I messed up, but I can't live with the silence anymore. You hate me, and I can't take it." I stared at her, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than anger. It wasn't sympathy or forgiveness. Those emotions were far out of reach, but a flicker of recognition. She was right. I did hate her, but I had been holding onto that hate like a lifeline, and now it felt like it was suffocating us both. "Maybe you should have thought about that before," I said coldly, but the words didn't land with the same sharpness as before. They felt hollow, like I was clinging to a script I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. Olivia flinched at my words but didn't respond. Instead, she stood up and walked out of the room, leaving the photo on the table. I sat down where she had been, picking up the picture and staring at the faces smiling back at me. The couple we used to be. I barely recognized the man in the photo. Back then, I had been full of hope, full of love. Now, I felt like a stranger in my own skin. I had destroyed Nate, and Olivia was suffering for what she had done. But why didn't I feel the satisfaction I thought I would? Why did it all feel so empty? I spent the next few days trying to shake the unease that had settled over me. The plan had been flawless. I had executed it perfectly. Nate's life was in ruins, Olivia was living in a hell of her own making, and yet, something was wrong. For the first time, I began to wonder if the revenge I had sought so desperately was really worth it. Just as I started questioning everything, Nate reappeared in my life. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I was on my way to work, moving through the usual fog of routine, when my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Nate. "We need to talk. Meet me at Miller's tonight." 8 p.m. I stared at the message, my pulse quickening. It had been months since I'd heard from him. After everything I'd done, I expected him to disappear for good. But here he was, asking for a meeting like nothing had happened. I thought about ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. What could Nate possibly want? Did he know I was the one behind the rumors that destroyed his life? Did he want revenge of his own? That evening, I walked into Miller's, the local dive bar we used to hang out at back when things were simpler. Nate was already there, sitting in the corner, nursing a beer. He looked worse than I remembered, his face gaunt, eyes hollow. He saw me walk in and gave a half-hearted nod. I sat down across from him. The tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. "Ben," he said, his voice raspy. "Thanks for meeting me." I didn't respond, just waited. I wasn't here for pleasantries. "I know you've heard about everything," he continued. "Megan's gone, the promotion's gone, hell, even the job is barely hanging on by a thread." I stayed silent, watching him carefully. He wasn't here for sympathy, that much I knew. There was something else. He took a long drink from his beer, staring down at the table. "Look, I'm not here to make excuses. I screwed up, man. I betrayed you, I betrayed Megan. I deserve everything that's happened. This wasn't what I expected. I expected anger, blame, maybe even a threat, but not this, not remorse. I've been doing a lot of thinking," Nate continued, still not meeting my eyes. "About why I did what I did. About how I could hurt you like that. And I realized, I was jealous." "Jealous?" I scoffed. "Of what?" Nate finally looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot but sincere. "Of you. Of your life. You had it all, man. The perfect wife, the perfect house, the perfect job. And here I was, stuck in a relationship I wasn't sure I wanted, living a life that felt like it wasn't mine. I saw what you had, and I wanted it. I thought if I could have a piece of what you had with Olivia, maybe it would make me feel, I don't know, alive again." I sat there, stunned. Nate's confession hit harder than I expected. This wasn't the Nate I knew, the cocky, confident guy who always seemed to have it together. This was a man who had lost everything and was now grasping at some kind of explanation, some kind of closure. "I ruined my own life, Ben," he said quietly. "But I also ruined yours. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know why." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to lash out, to tell him that his apology meant nothing, that he had destroyed everything I held dear. But another part of me, a part one hadn't acknowledged until that moment, felt something else. Pity. Nate had been selfish, yes, but he wasn't the monster I had built up in my mind. He was broken, just like Olivia, just like me. The silence between us stretched on, neither of us knowing what to say next. Nate finished his beer and stood up, glancing at me one last time. "I'm sorry, Ben. I really am." And with that, he left, leaving me alone at the table with my thoughts swirling. For the first time since this whole thing started, I didn't feel the rage or satisfaction that had been driving me. Instead, I felt empty. Nate was right. We had all ruined our own lives, and no amount of revenge could change that. Nate's apology sat with me like a stone in my chest, weighing me down as I drove home that night. His words echoed in my mind, "I ruined my own life, but I also ruined yours." He was right. Everything I had worked for, everything I had built up, was gone. But the truth was, it wasn't just Nate who had ruined things. I had done my fair share of damage too. I thought revenge would bring me closure. That it would somehow balance the scales. Nate had taken something precious from me, so I had to take something from him. And I had. I watched as his life crumbled, as his engagement fell apart, his career went down the drain, and his friendships dissolved into distrust. But standing over the wreckage, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, just emptiness. When I walked through the door, Olivia was sitting on the couch, staring at the TV, but not really watching it. She turned to me, her eyes dull, like she hadn't slept in days. "How was your night?" she asked quietly, her voice tired, as if even speaking took too much effort. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure what to say. For months, I had been holding on to this anger, letting it fuel every action, every plan. But now, after seeing Nate like that, after hearing his apology, I wasn't sure what I was holding on to anymore. "It was fine," I muttered, walking past her into the kitchen. I poured myself a drink, staring at the glass, wondering when everything had gotten so out of control. The revenge I had sought so desperately now felt meaningless, a hollow victory over a man who was already broken. Nate's life was ruined, but mine wasn't any better. And neither was Olivia's. I heard her footsteps behind me, soft and hesitant. She stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself, looking small and fragile. "Ben," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "we can't keep doing this." I turned to face her, my jaw tightening. "What do you want me to say, Olivia? That everything's okay now? That we can just forget about what you did?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I know we can't go back to how things were. I know I hurt you. I hurt us. But this isn't living. We're just existing. Barely." Her words hit me harder than I expected. She wasn't wrong. We had been living like ghosts, haunting the ruins of our past lives. There was no joy, no love, just an empty house filled with resentment and silence. "I don't know what you want from me," I said, my voice harsher than I intended. "I don't know either," she admitted, tears welling up in her eyes. "But this can't be it. We can't keep punishing each other forever." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because in that moment, I realized that was exactly what I had been doing. Punishing her, punishing myself, punishing Nate. And for what? To prove a point? To get revenge? None of it had made me feel any better. It hadn't brought me the peace I thought it would. Olivia stood there for a moment longer, waiting for me to say something, to give her some sign that things could change. But I had nothing left to give. So she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the empty hall. I sat down at the table, the silence of the house pressing in around me. I had gotten what I wanted, Nate's downfall, Olivia's guilt. But it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. Days passed, and the weight of everything that had happened hung over me like a dark cloud. I went through the motions of daily life, but nothing felt real anymore. Work was a blur, and conversations with colleagues were empty and meaningless. At home, Olivia and I existed in separate worlds, barely acknowledging each other. The revenge that had consumed me for so long now felt like a distant memory, a mistake that had cost me more than I realized. One night, I found myself sitting in the same spot at the kitchen table, the same photo of us from our happier days still lying there. I hadn't touched it since that night Olivia had left it behind. I picked it up again, staring at the smiles frozen in time, wondering if those people were still in there somewhere. Could we ever be those people again? The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I was surprised to see Megan standing there. "Hey, Ben," she said softly, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and uncertainty. "Megan?" I blinked, taken aback. "What are you doing here?" She hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "Can I come in?" I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. We sat down in the living room, an awkward tension hanging in the air. "I heard you met up with Nate," she began, her voice quiet. "Yeah," I said slowly. He apologized. For everything." Megan nodded, her expression unreadable. "He's been trying to make amends with everyone. But it's hard. Things are different now." I wasn't sure what she was getting at. "Why are you here, Megan?" She took a deep breath as if preparing herself for what she was about to say. I wanted to tell you that I've been thinking about things. About what happened, about you, about Olivia." Her words caught me off guard. I had expected anger, bitterness, maybe even accusations, but not this. "I don't know what happened between you and Nate exactly," she continued, "but I know that whatever he did to you, whatever Olivia did, it doesn't have to define you." I frowned, unsure of where she was going with this. Megan looked at me with a softness I hadn't expected. "Revenge won't heal you, Ben. It might feel good for a while, but in the end, it just leaves you empty." "I've been there. I know what it feels like." I swallowed hard, her words hitting closer to home than I wanted to admit. "I don't know what you're planning next," she said gently, "but whatever it is, just think about whether it's worth it. Whether it'll actually make you feel better. Or if it'll just dig the hole deeper." We sat in silence for a long time after that, Megan's words lingering in the air between us. I hadn't thought about what came next. I had been so focused on destroying Nate that I hadn't considered the aftermath, what my life would look like once the dust settled. Megan stood up to leave, but before she walked out the door, she turned to me one last time. "You deserve to move on, Ben. We all do." After she left, I sat in the quiet of the house, Megan's words echoing in my mind. For the first time, I realized that maybe this wasn't about revenge anymore. Maybe it was about letting go, of the anger, of the pain, of the past. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to move on. I spent the next few days in a fog, Megan's words circling in my mind like a slow-moving storm. You deserve to move on, Ben. We all do. Those words clung to me, but they weren't comforting. They felt like a challenge, like she had handed me a key to unlock a door I wasn't sure I wanted to open. Could I really let go of everything? Could I forgive, not just Olivia and Nate, but myself? I wasn't even sure I knew how. The revenge that had consumed my life for so long had left a void in its wake, and I had no idea what to fill it with. I had thought the destruction of Nate's life would fix everything, but it hadn't. He was broken, Olivia was broken, and so was I. The house was quiet that evening, as it usually was now. Olivia had retreated to the bedroom early, leaving me alone in the living room with my thoughts. I stared at the walls, at the photos that still hung there. Relics of a life that no longer existed. A wedding photo, one of us on a beach vacation, another from a friend's party where we were laughing, carefree. Those versions of us were long gone. I didn't know what I was waiting for, sitting in silence. Maybe I was hoping for some epiphany, some sudden clarity that would tell me what to do next. But no revelation came. All I had was a quiet house, an empty heart, and the growing realization that I couldn't live like this anymore. Eventually, I made my way upstairs, stopping in the doorway of the bedroom. Olivia was already in bed, the soft glow of the bedside lamp casting long shadows on the wall. She didn't look at me, her face turned toward the window. She had barely spoken to me since that night she said we couldn't keep punishing each other. Maybe she was right. I stood there for a long moment, staring at her, wondering if there was anything left to salvage. Could we ever find our way back to what we had? Or was this the end? The inevitable conclusion of a story that had gone horribly wrong? Olivia, I said softly, stepping into the room. She didn't turn, but I could see her body tense at the sound of my voice. For months, I had been cold, distant, and wrapped in my own anger and pain. But now, there was something else, a heaviness, a need to say what had been building inside me since that night at Miller's with Nate. I've been thinking, I continued, my voice quiet but steady. About everything. About us. Still, she didn't move, but I knew she was listening. I don't know if we can fix this, I said, the words hanging in the air between us. I don't even know if I want to. Her breath hitched, a soft, almost inaudible sound, and finally, she turned to face me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale, as if she hadn't slept in days. She looked just as broken as I felt. I don't either, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I don't want to live like this anymore, Ben. This hatred, this silence, it's killing us. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of everything we had gone through settling between us. There was no easy fix for what had happened. No simple words of forgiveness that could make it all go away. We were standing at the edge of something, and neither of us knew what lay on the other side. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said, my voice shaking with the truth of it. But I also don't know if I can keep living like this, holding on to all this anger. Olivia's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in months, I saw something in her that I hadn't allowed myself to see, regret, deep and painful. She had hurt me and shattered the trust we had built, but I wasn't the only one who had suffered. She had been living with the consequences of her choices every single day, just like I had. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Ben. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the space between us vast despite the small distance. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't sure if I was ready to accept her apology, but I also knew that this was the first time we were truly talking, truly facing what had happened. I don't know what happens next, I admitted, feeling raw and exposed. But I know we can't keep doing this. Olivia nodded, wiping at her eyes. I don't want to lose you, Ben. But if this is too much, if it's too broken, I understand. Her words hit me hard. For the first time, she was giving me a choice. For months, I had been holding everything in, determined to punish her for what she had done. But now, as she sat there, vulnerable and remorseful, I realized that the decision was mine. Did I want to keep holding on to the anger, or was I ready to let go? I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing, I was tired. Tired of the hatred, the coldness, the endless cycle of blame and guilt. Maybe Megan was right. Maybe revenge wasn't the answer. Maybe the only way to heal was to let go, of the past, of the pain. Of the version of ourselves that we used to be. I don't know if we can fix this, I said again, my voice barely above a whisper. But I think we have to try. Olivia looked at me, her eyes filled with hope and fear. You mean it? I nodded. Yeah, I do. And for the first time in months, it felt like there was a small crack in the wall I had built around myself. It wasn't much, but it was something. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough to start again. The morning after our conversation, the air in the house felt different. Lighter, maybe, or just less suffocating. It was subtle, no grand gestures, no sudden transformations, but there was a change. A crack had formed in the wall of resentment that had divided us for so long, and for the first time, there was a possibility of something other than silence and anger. I woke up early, earlier than usual, and lay in bed for a while, staring at the ceiling. Olivia was still asleep beside me, her breathing soft and steady. It was strange to feel her presence like this, calm, unspoken, and not weighed down by the heaviness of our past. I wasn't sure how to move forward, but I knew one thing. I didn't want to keep living in the cold void we'd created. That wasn't a marriage, it was a prison sentence. And while I didn't know if we could ever get back to what we once had, I figured we could at least try to be something other than enemies. I slipped out of bed quietly, heading downstairs to the kitchen. The sunlight streamed in through the window, casting a warm glow over the countertops. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt the faint stirrings of peace. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood by the window, thinking about everything that had happened. Nate, Olivia, the months of anger and revenge. I had tried so hard to destroy Nate's life, to punish Olivia, and in the process, I had almost destroyed myself. A soft sound from behind startled me. I turned to see Olivia standing in the doorway, wrapped in her robe. Her hair tousled from sleep. She looked hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she should come any closer. Morning, I said quietly, unsure of how to navigate this new territory between us. Morning, she replied, her voice just as soft. There was a pause, then she took a tentative step forward. Do you want some company? I nodded, and she came to stand beside me at the window. We stood there in silence, sipping our coffee, and watching the sunlight stretch across the yard. It felt awkward, but not in a bad way. More like we were both trying to figure out how to exist in this new space without falling back into old habits. After a while, Olivia spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm glad we talked last night. I glanced at her, catching the vulnerability in her expression. Yeah, me too. Another pause, and then she looked down at her coffee, biting her lip like she was working up the courage to say something more. I know it's going to take time. I know I've hurt you. And I can't undo that. But I want you to know, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this. To fix us. Her words hung in the air, fragile and full of promise. For a long time, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to tell her that it wasn't that simple, that trust doesn't just snap back into place after it's broken. But another part of me, the part that was tired of the endless anger, wanted to believe her. I don't know what fixing us looks like, I admitted, my voice quieter than I expected. But I guess we can figure it out. One step at a time. Olivia nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. That's all I want. Just one step at a time. It was a small moment, but it felt significant. We weren't making promises we couldn't keep, and we weren't pretending everything was fine. We were just acknowledging that maybe, somehow, we could move forward from this. Maybe we could try to rebuild, even if it wasn't the same as before. For the rest of the day, we moved carefully around each other. As if we were learning how to be together again. I noticed the small things. How she didn't flinch when I spoke to her, how she seemed less afraid of my presence. It was subtle, but it felt like a step in the right direction. That evening, after dinner, we sat in the living room together, something we hadn't done in months. Usually, I would retreat to my office, and she would sit alone in the kitchen or go to bed early. But tonight, we shared the same space, even if we weren't really talking. I watched Olivia as she flipped through a magazine, her legs tucked under her on the couch. There was something peaceful about the moment, a quiet reminder that maybe we could find our way back to each other, or at least to a place where we could coexist without the bitterness of our past haunting every interaction. At one point, Olivia looked up at me and smiled. Just a small, tentative smile, but it was the first real smile I had seen from her in a long time. I wasn't ready to smile back, not fully, but I nodded in acknowledgement. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Later, as we got ready for bed, I found myself thinking about Megan's words again. Revenge won't heal you, Ben. It might feel good for a while, but in the end, it just leaves you empty. She had been right. I had chased revenge, thinking it would fix the pain, but it had only deepened the wound. As I lay down beside Olivia that night, I realized something important. Forgiveness wasn't a single moment, but a process. It wasn't about absolving Olivia of what she had done, or about pretending like everything was okay. It was about allowing myself to let go of the anger, bit by bit, and choosing, every day, not to let it consume me anymore. We still had a long way to go. There would be more difficult conversations and more painful reminders of what had happened. But for the first time, I felt like we were both willing to try. And maybe, in the end, that was the first real step toward healing. The next few days passed slowly, as if time itself was hesitant to move forward. Olivia and I fell into a delicate rhythm, careful not to push too hard or stir up any old wounds. We weren't pretending things were perfect, far from it, but we had started to coexist in a way that didn't feel as hostile or fractured. I wasn't sure if it was progress or just a temporary truce. But it was something. One evening, after dinner, Olivia sat down across from me at the kitchen table. There was a nervous energy about her, and I knew she had something on her mind. I set my glass down, watching her fidget with the napkin in her lap. "Ben," she began, her voice hesitant, "I think we need to talk about everything. Not just the affair, but the way things got to this point." I stiffened at her words, my instinct telling me to retreat, to protect myself from whatever was coming next. But I knew she was right. We couldn't just keep skating around the truth. If we were ever going to move forward, we had to unpack the damage. I took a deep breath. "Okay, let's talk." Olivia's eyes met mine, and I could see the pain there. The guilt she carried with her every day. "I know I hurt you. I know I betrayed your trust in the worst way possible. And I don't expect you to ever forget that. But I've been thinking a lot about why it happened." I didn't say anything, but my chest tightened. This was the part one had been avoiding, the reasons. In my mind, I had convinced myself that the affair was a simple betrayal, a selfish, thoughtless decision she had made. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. There had to be. "I'm not excusing what I did," she continued, her voice soft but steady. "I made a terrible choice, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I've been thinking about us. About how we got here. And I can't help but wonder if we started falling apart long before Nate came into the picture." I swallowed hard, the words hitting closer to home than I expected. I hadn't wanted to admit it, but she wasn't wrong. We hadn't been happy for a long time, maybe even years. Somewhere along the way, we had lost each other. But I hadn't wanted to confront that. It was easier to blame the affair, to focus all my anger and hurt on that one moment of betrayal. "I don't know when it happened," Olivia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we stopped being us. We stopped talking, really talking. We started living separate lives under the same roof." I felt a lump forming in my throat, the truth of her words settling in. She wasn't just talking about the affair, she was talking about everything. The distance that had grown between us, the silence that had replaced the connection we once had. We had been drifting apart for years, and neither of us had done anything to stop it. "I know I should have come to you," Olivia said, her eyes filled with regret. "I should have told you how lonely I felt, how disconnected we were. But I didn't. And then, Nate happened, and I thought," she broke off, her voice cracking. "I thought maybe he could fill the emptiness I felt. But it was a mistake. A horrible mistake." Her confession hit me like a punch to the gut. I had always seen Nate as the enemy, the man who had taken something from me. But hearing Olivia talk about the emptiness, the loneliness, it made me realize that this wasn't just about Nate. It was about us. About everything we had failed to address in our marriage. "I don't know what to say," I admitted, my voice tight with emotion. "I've been so angry, Olivia. So focused on what you did, on punishing you and Nate. That I haven't really stopped to think about us." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know. And I don't blame you for that. You had every right to be angry. But I think we need to face the truth, Ben. We both let this happen. We both stopped trying." I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. She was right, again. I had been so caught up in my own pain that I hadn't considered my role in all of this. I had stopped trying long before Olivia did. I had withdrawn, focused on my career. On everything except the woman sitting across from me. "Where do we go from here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Olivia wiped at her eyes, her expression filled with uncertainty. "I don't know. I want to fix things, but I don't know if we can. I don't know if we even know how to anymore." Her honesty shook me. She wasn't offering false hope or empty promises. She was laying everything out on the table, raw and unfiltered. And for the first time, I realized that the path forward wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about deciding if we even wanted to try. I don't know either, I admitted, feeling the weight of the uncertainty pressing down on me. But I'm willing to try. I don't know if we'll ever be what we used to be, but maybe we can be something different. Something better. Olivia looked at me, her eyes searching mine as if trying to gauge if I really meant it. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. I want that too. I don't know how to get there. Neither do I said, a small, bitter smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. But I guess the first step is being honest. With each other, with ourselves. She smiled then, just a small, fragile smile, but it was real. Yeah, honesty. We sat in silence for a long time after that, the weight of everything we had discussed hanging between us. It wasn't easy, and I knew it wouldn't be easy moving forward. We had a long road ahead of us, filled with painful conversations and difficult truths. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were both willing to walk that road together. It wasn't about pretending everything was okay, or sweeping the past under the rug. It was about facing the damage we had done, to each other, to ourselves, and deciding whether or not we wanted to rebuild. It wasn't a promise of a happy ending, but it was a start. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. It had been a few weeks since Olivia and I started trying to put the pieces of our broken marriage back together. Every day felt like walking a tightrope, one wrong move and everything could come crashing down again. But the truth was, I was starting to feel something I hadn't felt in months, hope. We had taken the first step by talking, really talking. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered between us, an unspoken tension that hadn't been fully addressed. Nate, the man who had been at the center of all this. The man I had made it my mission to destroy. Even though I had pulled back from my revenge-fueled rampage, the damage was already done. I had left Nate's life in ruins. And there was no taking that back. I didn't regret what I had done, but I also knew that holding onto that anger wasn't helping either of us. It was time to confront it. One evening, Olivia and I were sitting on the couch, a movie playing quietly in the background. We weren't really watching it, just sitting in the same room, which had become something of a routine for us. I glanced at her, noticing the way she absent-mindedly twisted her wedding ring on her finger. It was a nervous habit she had developed since the affair, and it was hard not to notice how much it weighed on her. Olivia, I said, breaking the silence, we need to talk about Nate. Her body stiffened, and she turned to face me slowly, her expression unreadable. What about him? I paused, trying to find the right words. I think we can't really move forward until we deal with what happened. With him. She looked down at her hands, avoiding my gaze. I don't know what to say about it. He's gone, Ben. I haven't spoken to him since everything fell apart. I know, I said, my voice steady. But it's not just about you and him. It's about me too. What I did to him. Olivia's eyes finally met mine, and I could see the pain there, the guilt she carried for her part in the destruction of Nate's life. I know you did what you thought you had to do, Ben. But it doesn't change what happened between me and him. I was wrong. He was wrong. But I don't know what you want me to say. I don't know either, I admitted, the words heavy. But I can't pretend that he's not still part of this. We can try to fix us, but he's like a ghost between us, Olivia. And until we deal with it, he's always going to be there. She sighed, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of everything had finally caught up with her. I don't want to keep talking about him, Ben. It's over. He's out of our lives. I know, I said quietly, but the anger I felt, it's still here, even if I don't want to admit it. I spent so long hating him, wanting to destroy him, that I'm not sure I know how to let it go. Olivia's eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of understanding there. You're right. We haven't dealt with it. I haven't dealt with it. I thought if I just stayed away from him, from everything, it would somehow fix things. But it hasn't. There was a long pause, the weight of her words hanging between us. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you want to know why it happened? With him? The question caught me off guard. Did I? Part of me wanted to know every detail. To understand what had driven her into another man's arms. But another part of me, the part that had spent months trying to bury the pain, was terrified of what the truth might be. I don't know, I said honestly. But I think we can't move forward if I don't. Olivia took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she began to speak. It wasn't about him, Ben. Not really. He wasn't some great love or someone I was trying to replace you with. He was there, and I was lost. I felt so disconnected from you. From us. I made a horrible mistake because I thought, for just a moment, that he could fill that void. Her words hit me hard, but I stayed silent, letting her continue. It wasn't love. It wasn't even real, she said, her voice thick with emotion. It was just a way to escape. And I regret it every single day. I know I can't undo it, and I know it's a scar on our marriage that might never fully heal. But I need you to know that it wasn't about you not being enough. It was about me not being able to face what was happening between us. I felt a lump form in my throat, the truth of her words sinking in. This wasn't just about the affair, it was about everything that had come before it. The years of silence, of drifting apart. Nate had been a symptom of a much deeper problem, one that we had both contributed to. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive him, I admitted, my voice rough with emotion. But I don't want to carry this anger with me anymore. I don't want him to have that kind of power over us. Olivia nodded, tears filling her eyes. I don't either. I'm so tired of it, Ben. I'm tired of feeling like I ruined everything. I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. We both made mistakes, and we both had to figure out how to move forward. Together. For the first time in months, it felt like we were finally facing the truth head on. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't going to be fixed overnight. But acknowledging the pain, the mistakes, and the damage was the first real step toward healing. The days after that conversation with Olivia were filled with a strange mixture of hope and uncertainty. It was as though we had opened a door to a new chapter, but neither of us knew exactly what to do next. The honesty between us was raw and uncomfortable, but it was also liberating. For the first time, we weren't just ignoring the cracks in our relationship. We were facing them together, even if the path forward was still unclear. One evening, I came home from work to find Olivia sitting on the porch. A glass of wine in her hand. She looked peaceful, the setting sun casting a warm glow across her face. It was a stark contrast to the tension that had hung between us for so long. I sat down next to her, feeling the cool breeze on my skin. We didn't say anything for a while, just sat there in the quiet, watching the sky change colors. After a few minutes, Olivia broke the silence. I've been thinking about us, she said softly, her eyes focused on the horizon. About what we've been through. And where we go from here. I nodded, unsure of what to say. I had been thinking about the same thing. It felt like we had reached a crossroads, a moment where we had to decide whether to keep walking down the same path or forge a new one. I don't want to go back to what we were, she continued, her voice steady. That version of us wasn't working. We were distant, disconnected. I don't think either of us was happy. Her words hit home, and I realized she was right. As much as I had been clinging to the idea of restoring what we once had. The truth was, that version of our relationship was broken long before the affair. We had been living separate lives under the same roof, going through the motions without really being present for each other. I don't want to go back either, I said finally, the words coming out more easily than I expected. But I don't know how to move forward. Olivia turned to look at me, her expression thoughtful. Maybe we don't have to figure it all out right now. Maybe it's about starting over. Not as the people we were, but as who we are now. The idea of starting over felt both terrifying and exhilarating. We had been through so much pain, betrayal, and anger. But maybe there was a chance to rebuild. Not to erase the past, but to find a way to move beyond it. I don't know what that looks like, I admitted, my voice quiet. But I'm willing to try. Olivia smiled, a small, hopeful smile that I hadn't seen in a long time. Me too. We sat there for a while longer. The silence between us no longer feeling heavy or strained. It felt like a new beginning, a tentative step into the unknown. We weren't pretending that everything was fixed, but for the first time, it felt like we were both ready to try, to rebuild, to forgive, and maybe even to love again. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be more difficult conversations and more moments of doubt. But as the sun set and the world grew darker, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of possibility. Maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. Not as the people we used to be, but as the people we were becoming. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I was okay with that. It had been months since the first honest conversation Olivia and I had after the affair, and even though we had come a long way, The weight of everything that had happened still lingered. Some days were better than others. We had learned to communicate in ways we hadn't before, but there were still moments when the past crept in like a shadow, threatening to undo the progress we'd made. One afternoon, Olivia and I sat in the living room, the familiar quiet between us more comfortable now than it used to be. We were both on our phones, enjoying the kind of silence that didn't feel heavy with unspoken tension. That's when I got the call, one I didn't expect. "Ben, it's Nate." Hearing his voice was like being hit with a cold gust of wind. My stomach clenched, and I instinctively gripped my phone tighter. I hadn't heard from him since I had torn his life apart. And frankly, I never thought I would again. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I think we need to talk. I've lost everything, Ben. My job, my friends, everything. I know you had a hand in that. But I'm not calling to yell or to ask for anything. I'm calling because I want closure. For both of us." I wasn't sure if I believed him, but something in his voice felt different, defeated, maybe even sincere. I glanced at Olivia, who looked up from her phone, sensing the change in my mood. I didn't want to bring this into our home, into the space we had worked so hard to rebuild, but I knew that if I didn't confront Nate now, I never would. And that would mean always carrying the ghost of what happened to me. "Fine," I said finally, my voice firm. "Where?" We agreed to meet at a coffee shop on the outskirts of town. As I hung up the phone, Olivia's eyes were on me, a question hanging between us. "That was Nate," I said quietly, the words heavy in the air. "He wants to meet." Her face paled slightly, and I could see the worry in her eyes. "Ben, are you sure? After everything, do you think it's a good idea?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think I need to do this. For us. To close this chapter for good." She nodded, her expression softening. "Okay, just be careful." I squeezed her hand before heading out, unsure of what I would say or how I would feel when I saw him. The drive to the coffee shop felt longer than it should have. My mind racing with 100 different scenarios. Part of me wanted to punch him, to scream at him for everything he had done. But another part of me, maybe the part that had healed, was ready to let it go. When I walked into the coffee shop, I spotted him immediately. Nate was sitting at a corner table, looking a lot different from the last time I had seen him. He looked worn down, his hair disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. He had lost weight too. The confident, charming guy who had once been so easy to hate was gone. This was a man who had lost everything. I sat down across from him, and for a moment, we just looked at each other, neither of us sure how to start. "I deserve everything you did to me," Nate said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost resigned. "I was selfish. I destroyed our friendship. I destroyed your marriage, and in the end, I destroyed my own life too." Hearing him acknowledge it didn't feel as satisfying as I thought it would. It didn't erase the anger or the pain, but it did shift something inside me. Maybe it was seeing how broken he looked, how far he had fallen, but for the first time, I felt pity for him. He wasn't the enemy I had built up in my mind anymore. He was just a man who had made a terrible mistake. "I didn't just ruin your life, Nate," I said, my voice steady. "I went after you. I spread those rumors. I made sure you lost your job and your friends. I wanted to see you suffer, and I made sure you did." Nate nodded, his eyes downcast. "I figured as much. But honestly, I can't blame you. I deserved it." For a long moment, we sat there in silence, the weight of everything between us hanging in the air. I didn't feel the same rage I had months ago. Instead, I felt a strange kind of release, like the anger had finally burned itself out. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," Nate said quietly. "I don't expect that. I just wanted to look you in the eye and say I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it." I nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. I had spent so long hating him, blaming him for everything that had gone wrong in my life, that it was hard to process his apology. But as I sat there, looking at the broken man across from me, I realized something. Holding onto the anger wasn't helping me anymore. It wasn't giving me closure, it was keeping me tied to the past, to a version of myself I didn't want to be. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I said honestly, "but I think I'm ready to move on. I don't want to carry this with me anymore. And I think it's time for you to move on too." Nate looked up at me, surprised, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "That means more than you know." We didn't say much after that. There wasn't much left to say. We had both done terrible things, and we had both paid the price for it. But sitting there in that coffee shop, I realized that the past didn't have to define the rest of our lives. We could choose to let it go, to move forward, even if we would never fully forget. As I left the coffee shop, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. I had come face to face with the man who had torn my life apart, and somehow, I had walked away feeling lighter. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was enough. When I got home, Olivia was waiting for me, her eyes full of questions. I sat down next to her on the couch, taking her hand in mine. "How did it go?" she asked softly. I looked at her, feeling a calm I hadn't felt in a long time. "It's over," I said simply. "I think it's finally over." Olivia smiled a small, relieved smile, and leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder. We sat there in the quiet, the weight of the past slowly lifting, and for the first time in months, I felt like we were free. Free to move forward, free to rebuild, free to start again. And maybe that was what closure really meant, not forgetting, but finally letting go.